Okay, I can notice some people have started to join us. That's great. So welcome everyone. Welcome to another Plan Tracker and PlanHELP community webinar. We are so pleased to be here. Let me introduce myself. My name is Sarah. I'm Community Engagement Manager at Plan Tracker. And today joining me is the beautiful Carolyn Daley from PlanHELP. Carolyn, do you want to just spend a few moments introducing yourself to those who haven't worked with you or haven't met you before, and just explain a little bit about kind of the work that you do, I guess, in this space?
So I'm Caroline. My daughter is now 21. She's been a participant of the NDIS since 2013. So we're now 8 years into the scheme. Have experienced a huge amount of change over that time. So we were the first people to self-manage an NDIS plan. I wrote the original self-management training for the NDIS, so all of those original documents that were up on the website to teach self-managers. Professionally, I've worked, I guess, coaching a lot of families through plan reviews. And we specialise, so PlanHELP specialises at the moment in I guess situations where life doesn't actually match what the plan is. So helping families to gather the right evidence, and supporting them through that planning meeting, and then how to implement that on the other side. I come from a background of change management and training, so navigating systems is part of what I do. And I've sort of done forever. So, and some of that work that we do gets funded through NDIS plans, but a lot of it's actually through private consulting, because people just, their plans are too small, there's nothing in there to actually be able to get through the initial sort of space. So, which is a bit disappointing 8 years in, that's where the scheme is for some families. But that's why I think for me it's important to be part of these sorts of sessions to help, I guess, increase the level of knowledge for everyone in our community, so that it doesn't just become something that, you can only access if you can afford to do so. So
that's right. And it so depends on your background, your experience, so many different reasons, isn't it? That sort of pathways that bring you to this point where you need to be able to interact and succeed at interacting with this system that we call the NDIA or the NDIS. So it takes a lot of not only does it take a lot of nervous energy, I think, and effort and time, but it takes a bit of skill development. I guess, and that's the part that you provide for families. Okay. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to give us some more of your time. We really enjoyed our last Facebook Live session where we talked more specifically around just the review process that individuals would go through depending on which stage their plan was up to. And so today we've been collecting, over the last week and a bit, we've been collecting questions directly from our community. And so we've collated those into a little bit of series, which we're going to jump straight into now. Let's just see. But the first thing I want to let all of our audience know is that the beautiful Justine, who is one of my team members from South Australia, actually, she's down live in the chat box. So give her a shout, let her know that you're there and where you are from. If you've got any questions, things like that, by all means, jump in there with Justine. We're going to address the submitted questions first, of course, and then we'll see how much time allows us to go backwards and forwards through the chat box. So please feel free to connect with Justine there. So let's just see if we can dive right in. I'll just share my screen. Okay, Carolyn, are you there with me? Are you on the screen?
Yep, I'm still here.
Let's dive in.
I'm here.
Okay. Can you see the screen? Let's dive in.
Yep.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, so we've categorized everyone. We sort of grouped the questions into similar. So we'll start with budget type questions, and then we'll go on to evidence and reports. We've also got a section which is very timely right now because many of our families are in lockdown. So we've got a section about COVID lockdown. And then the end, we're going to touch on some of those big picture stuff, like where's the scheme up to? What are they thinking? Where are we going? That type of thing. So let's move across to the first one, which is the area of budget. Okay, so question one, I might just read out the question for our audience, Carolyn, and then I'll hand it directly over to you. So first one is, I have a lot of funding in my NDIS plan and most of it never seems to get used. They are in CB daily activity, core daily activities and core social communities, how can I access those amounts to use them, and what areas do they cover?
Okay, look, thank you for the question. There's a little part of me that this many years into the scheme, that you're having difficulty actually starting your plan, just pulls on my heartstrings a little bit. In that obviously there are a lot of families that need that support to get started, and I think there's a future question that does talk about how to get your plan started. So we'll go into that a little bit more there.
Yep.
And talk about these specifics here. So your core daily activities, that is typically the supports to get you up and ready for the day, is what I call them, or your life admin type of roles. So for many families, it's that support to have a shower, to have meals prepared, to pay bills, to do some grocery shopping, to a bit of house cleaning, garden maintenance, those sorts of things will fall into that. There's a lot of NDIS registered providers and also a lot of non-registered providers around that provide those types of supports. I'm assuming coming through Plan Tracker, there's a reasonable chance that the plan is plan managed, which means that you can actually access a broader group of providers around that. What I often recommend is if you talk to other people that you know, there's a good chance that they're using some other providers around. Otherwise, even a quick Google search, NDIS, your suburb, and then showering, meal prep, any of those sorts of things can actually help you to identify some around, or we'll talk into the further implementation stuff in a moment. The core social communities, so again, core supports are your everyday type of supports, and that social communities is the getting out and about. So the funding for support staff to help you to do your activities of choice. So for some people that may look like one-to-one supports, to go for a walk, go to, I don't know, a painting class or an art class. They don't actually pay for the activity itself, but they pay for the support staff to do that. For other families, they might choose to be involved in some group programs. So some of those are provided by the large registered and non-registered providers. And again, we're seeing a lot now where it is Wednesday set up as, here's the day we do a cooking lesson, or Thursday is the day we do some art and craft activities. And so it's just around picking the things that are interesting, passionate about, and doing that. So your CB daily activity, that's your therapy budget, typically speaking. So often we'll see funding in that for an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, speech pathologist. Occasionally we'll see a dietitian, but that's typically just for families where there's tube feeding. So I guess it's a broad overarching thing. They're what those three things do. And again, ask around people in your networks. They'll let you know who's good, who's not. Sometimes some Facebook groups can be local and can also help you to find those as well.
The local ones are really good, aren't they? Because they can give you some really good, and you don't always find that information off the organisation or the services website. You know, it often is old news. It does, you know, it's very general, but the actual day-to-day interactions, you know, or services, that information can come from local families, can't it? Which is super helpful. Yeah. All right, moving on. So I've just received my new plan and it's got all the hours allocated to the therapists. It says 20 hours for physio, 10 for OT. It doesn't match up with the therapy reports. Plus there's no hours written for the hydrotherapy assistant. Does that mean it's not approved?
Okay, thanks for this question. This is a multi-layered sort of question, I guess. So where an NDIS plan is written with the 20 hours physio, 10 hours OT, that is how the plan was built. So that is what the NDIS planner, the delegate, has deemed to be reasonable and necessary. And that's how they've put the funding into the plan. We often find that they don't match up with therapy reports. So we know that behind the scenes, the NDIS uses a multiple range of tools as to what people will typically engage with. So we see a lot of I guess in that sort of early teen years, where a therapy report will go, oh, this kid needs to do speech therapy every week and OT every week and physio every week. And then the parents are reporting, actually, the kid won't engage in any of these things. They're 13, 14, have decided that that's not part of what they do. So what we actually see are plans that are built to what life will be, not necessarily to what a therapy report will be. Obviously, if you feel there's a definite mismatch and there is that need, everyone has the right to review and to go through that process. But it's not uncommon to see that. Within that budget, you have that flexibility to use the supports as you need. So a hydrotherapy assistant is actually a physiotherapist assistant typically, where they would fall under. So you can certainly access the assistant at that hourly rate to implement that hydrotherapy plan. What I have seen though is that depending on the complexity and the physicality and what's required, is that sometimes it's actually possible for physiotherapists to train support workers to assist with the hydrotherapy program. And which is where that core sort of social funding comes through as well, which is just another way you can stretch that budget a little bit further. So
when you say complexities, can I just clarify, is that the complexities in the risk assessment, is that made by the family or the individual, or is that made by the actual lead therapist, or is it sort of, is there a formal way to assess that, or is it just individual?
Look, it'll be individual. It'll be a range of those things, essentially. So you will get some complexities where a physiotherapist will go, I don't feel safe training someone who's unskilled to do this, and so that, and they have that right to be able to do that. And you'll have some families who also go, yeah, I get that you're happy to train a support worker, but actually we don't feel safe, because obviously water and particular types of disability don't necessarily mix. Comes every point in time. So it's a very individual conversation to be had. And open, honest conversations are always the best way to get the best outcome, particularly when you're working with your therapists. They can only work on the information you give them.
So the headline for that one is the NDIS was simply showing you how they built the plan, but within that you can make up your own combination that suits in relation to how much you would use a therapy assistant, depending on what's, all right. Let's move to next one. In my son's plan meeting last week, I asked for continued therapy for speech and OT. The LAC said no to OT. She explained the speech therapist could work on both goals, and so adding OT would be a duplication. I said they do very different things, and the NDIS letters say that too. Can I add another goal in the plan to get the OT funding? I'm so stressed out by this. I felt this when I read this email coming from this mother. I felt a sense of that sometimes it's confusing, or you're sort of disappointed by the decline. And then when the LAC or the planner explains it, you're even more confused. You're even more stressed. So how would you break this down for someone, Carolyn?
Look, we're seeing a lot at the moment where different therapies are being declined as duplication of supports, is what the language that the agency is using at the moment. Not new, it's always been something that they do. Certainly another goal can assist, but that goal also has to be related to the disability type. So one place that we see this quite a lot is with families with a participant who has autism, where all of the therapists involved want to work on emotional regulation or some form of that. And because everything's sort of tied back to that particular goal, and the goal, there may be three goals. So one may be manage my emotions, one may be to reduce behaviours of concern, but they're all kind of work the same. It's the same basic skill set within a person that you're looking to develop in amongst that. And so that's where that duplication comes in. What we see then are that, again, families look to add, particularly for an OT, I need to work on fine motor skills, or I need to work on gross motor skills, as a general evidence-based thing. So from the agency's perspective, difficulties with fine motor and gross motor are not necessarily directly related to an autism diagnosis. So we know a lot of families where they do, they are comorbidities, they happen together. But as a general rule, part of the diagnostic criteria of an autism diagnosis does not include fine and gross motor skills. So it's around actually proving that there's that deficit, for want of a nicer word, but there's a discrepancy between the age of the person and the age appropriateness of what they're able to do that warrants the need for an OT. So just throwing an extra goal in won't necessarily increase that unless you actually have evidence-based where that discrepancy is. So typically a speech pathologist is seen as someone who does language, so expressive, receptive, pragmatic, which is that social skills. OTs are fine gross motor. Physios are largely that gross motor sort of side of things. And so if you sort of take that, I guess, broad overarching approach to some of those things, they're the types of things that you need to be looking at and evidencing to actually get one of those professionals included in the plan. Of course, there is flexibility within a budget. We're always cautious advising people to use that. So even though the LAC has said we haven't funded the OT, choice and control, flexibility, you would be able to use them, but what you're demonstrating to the agency then is that you may not need as much speech therapy next time around. So you've just got to be cautious weighing up the differences between using that. So that's one of the responses that I see quite often through different Facebook pages. You can choose whatever you want to, just be cautious when you choose to do that.
Well, that's good. That's a really good, and I think so that it comes back to goals do direct some of this or do inform some of this, but not just any goal, really being thoughtful about it and really understanding what that, and also what the agency understands that therapist, what their skill set is too, for them to provide. All right, moving on. Now we'll go into reports and evidence and all those types of areas. Okay, I just received the first behaviour plan for my daughter. I don't think it's right. It's got small mistakes and that's okay, but the recommendations at the end are terrible. They don't know my daughter well enough, and it's been a lot of funding used to get this report. Now it's wasted. Can I go to another provider and start again? They told me this report gets submitted to the NDIA directly. And I'm worried that they will use this one. It's so stressful. Another issue that's left to me to fix. There's a few exhausted mamas out there at the moment. Can you tell, Carolyn? Obviously, So I guess I'll just hand it to you straight away, just to break it down and share some thoughts about this.
Let's go again, 3 or 4 different components into this one. Look, the underarching, I guess, or the overarching guiding principle of the NDIS, choice and control. You can choose whichever providers you want. Of course, you can go and start again with a new provider. Underpinning that is also you get the right to make a good and bad decisions. That's just part of life. So sometimes we'll pick good providers, sometimes we'll pick bad providers, sometimes we'll think we'll pick good ones and they don't end up being that way. So short answer, of course you can, particularly if there's the funding there to do that. In a lot of cases, because behaviour support is agency managed, the providers will submit the reports to the agency. It's not necessarily they have to, but it is the one way that they can demonstrate that they've completed the work and that it's there. And depending on the behaviours of concern that are in there, there are instances where that's actually a good thing for everybody involved, that are documented in a more formal sort of format, I guess. What I do find though is that with a lot of behaviour support plans, particularly the first plans, they're challenging for parents, for kids, for everybody, and kids being little as well as adults. So wherever a first plan is being brought into play, it's challenging, and a lot of the time the behaviour support practitioner actually has to go back and show that we've tried stuff. So there's a lot of things that you would have done years ago, 6 months ago, however long ago, that didn't work at that point in time, but there's no evidence. It hasn't been documented anywhere. So sometimes you have to go back, and it's more around gathering evidence as opposed to we expect this to be the final plan that happens. And so again, open, honest conversation with the practitioner around what they expect to achieve. So have they just written this plan, handed it over, and you've got a star chart to complete, and that's going to solve all of the problems? In which case, probably looking for another provider and asking some smarter questions before you engage them, maybe part of that process. But if the response back is, look, we're gathering data, we need to know how this happens, some of the triggers, to help us pull apart some of what's happening, then it can actually be worth doing that bit of work to see where it is. And I know as a parent, having someone, it feels like judge your parenting style, can be really, really challenging. And that's not the role of the behaviour support practitioner. So they do generally come in completely non-judgmental and solve through a process to get the evidence that's needed. And ultimately, this is where, particularly where there are behaviours of concern, this is where the agency will get their evidence of what is happening in a person's life to make sure that those other supports are funded appropriately. So
so it is. So you're saying it's an important piece of evidence as far as the agency. They prioritise it fairly highly if there's a behaviour plan documented.
And as they should. So to get the funding for a behaviour support plan typically indicates that there's multiple behaviours of concern happening for a participant, and whether they all require the one solution or multiple solutions is part of what the practitioner will find. But often we find that that information is not documented well anywhere else. So
then should families see a draft of a behaviour plan, or is this might be getting controversial, but what do you think about that? So I'm hearing some do get drafts and they do get to give feedback before it's finalised, and others don't, and some of them actually have trouble seeing it, or getting a copy, which is the other end of the spectrum. But what do you think? Do you think it's appropriate to families to be able to give feedback on a draft?
Look, I think it's an important question to ask before you engage a behaviour support practitioner,
right?
As to what their practice is. So for some people, that will be an essential part of it, and it may be that to and fro of understanding why this particular thing is being recommended. For other people, just solve the problem for me and give it to me at the end and help me implement it is the right approach. So knowing what's going to work for you, but having those questions up front, I think actually become a lot more useful in that. And again, some of these things are dictated a little bit by funding as well. So if it's a really tight budget, a practitioner may not have that opportunity to be able to have too much backwards and forwards, because you'll do that and you won't actually get the final report at the end because the budgets run out. There's multiple things at play. Questions up front are always, and again, you often have to go through this before you know what the questions are that you need to ask.
So true. It's so true, isn't it? It's so true. Okay. Well, look, thanks for that. I mean, that's sort of behaviour plans are always a little bit, there's more things feeding into a behaviour plan. So I appreciate you sort of breaking that down there. Okay, next question. I remember this one. So I asked for support coordination funding in our last plan review to help with my son's transition to high school. They said no because I've successfully self-managed for 2 years already. That's got nothing to do with why I'm asking for support coordination. This actually came in, the same scenario came in different words, but 3 times, Carolyn, this one. So I'm sure this is nothing new to you. So let's break it down for everyone.
And look, and honestly, one of the reasons why PlanHELP does a lot of private consulting work is because of this particular scenario where people are at a transition point, they need support coordination, but haven't actually managed to get it put through a plan for whatever reason that happens to. So but you're right, self-management and the skills needed to do that versus what a support coordinator can help you with a transition point are very different from a parent's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
From an agency perspective, it's often seen around capacity to do things. So if you can self-manage, of course, you can navigate a change, you'll be fine, you don't need support, is the approach that is often taken. So that we do know, so the NDIS released their new quarterly report yesterday. Appears to be around 43-46% of plans have support coordination in them. So we know that the agency is not necessarily against support coordination as a thing or something to put into plans. It's just around how do you demonstrate that need for it. And a transition point is usually enough, but just saying it's a transition point won't be enough to provide that evidence that that's required. So it's a transition point, and I've never done this before, and I have friends that have done X, Y, Z, and I know that I'm not going to be able to navigate those. Or my kid doesn't want me to be involved. So transitioning out of high school is often one where we see a lot of NDIS participants who go from sort of that 16 to 19 years. At that point, I can do this myself. And it's like, you can, but you actually need to learn some skills in amongst that because you're still 16 and it's still a challenging process. So being able to put more of a story behind I'm transitioning, here's why I need the help, here's what I think that help will look like. Actually becomes part of that story to put forward as well through that. So
that's so important, isn't it? Is sort of being prepared to tell that story or paint that picture and what important elements of that need to be told, and not making the assumption that it's like, oh, I'm going through a life transition. And not making an assumption that the planner or the LAC on the other side of that conversation are actually joining all those dots. There's no assumption that they should do that. We have to be able to do that.
And I think that's the challenging thing as a parent, because when we talk to each other, we know that there's the difficult points. We know that even just having someone else to bounce ideas off of is a really, really useful thing to be able to do. So even if we do, as the agency says, we have the capacity because we've self-managed, we can do this, we still need to have some of those conversations. And some of those conversations can't be had just within our natural networks. They expose vulnerabilities that we're not keen to do. We actually need a professional relationship at times as well. So
excellent. Great. Thanks for that. All right, next question. All right, so we're getting into COVID lockdown territory now, Carolyn. So, this was such a dilemma actually when I received this. I thought, oh my goodness, yes, I've been there. I've thought about this, inside lockdown, outside of lockdown too. But I'm worried about losing our spot with our OT clinic. My child did a few Zoom therapy appointments, but now refuses. Should I offer to keep paying a cancellation fee during lockdown to hold my child's spot for therapy? It's so hard to get a regular therapy spot. I don't want to lose it. So over to you.
Look, see this a lot, a conversation we do have a lot as well. Seems to happen in areas where there are a lot of larger providers that have long wait lists as a particular thing, or someone has a prime time slot. So often that just after school lets out is the one that everybody wants to be able to jump into. So if you have to have that one,
so true.
This seems to come up a lot.
You'd sell your kidney. You'd sell your kidney for that 3:30 spot, Carolyn.
Look,
you would.
Absolutely. Like I said, my daughter's older, but we've done years and years and years of therapy. Absolutely. So no judgment here from wanting to protect that, because I totally get it. What I do often recommend to our families is actually use this as a chance to have a look around. So often we so that you're making an informed decision as opposed to a fear-based decision in what to do. So often we see families who they've engaged therapy, so say an OT in this example, 2, 3, 5 years ago, however long that was. they've moved through, so they've had the really dodgy times, they've done this, they've now got that prime time, and all along being told how great the therapy is, but they're not necessarily seeing the results on the ground. They're not necessarily working on the things that they see as important, but they've never had a chance to really think what therapy could look like in amongst that. So often we're told that therapy needs to happen on a weekly basis or a fortnightly basis. And there's no end to it. There's no particular, it's a big broad goal. There's nothing overly specific. And for some people and some families, that's the right approach. For others, and particularly again, as a child ages, so you might have started therapy at 8, but you're now 13. Again, things change within that. So being able to focus for a few weeks I want to work on doing our buttons. So a little bit of a focused intent for that can actually be a useful sort of approach. So to take this as an opportunity to ring around, see who else is in your area, think about what you actually want from that therapy, what you expect to see through that. And then you can make that informed decision as opposed to that fear-based.
Yeah.
So, and it may be that you choose to keep that spot for now, but you're now on a wait list for somewhere else that's around. It may be that you've looked, this is absolutely the best place for your family, or it may be that one of the new providers around, there's an allied health professional who's going out on their own, who actually can do what you want when you want.
And I think that there's a difference. Well, I started to notice a difference because I was in early intervention, and so that's when allied health therapy started intensively for my 2 children. And then I got to a point where I was like, I didn't want to let go, because then I thought, we're doing well now, but then when we hit a tough time, I won't have this support here, this weekly or fortnightly support here. And I had to reframe what I understood support to be, because it started to become so much more than going to an allied health clinic or having that regular in-home session or whatever. And this is not to diminish the importance of allied health therapy and that formalized approach of therapy at all. It is simply that idea that life is no one learns and builds capacity at that even trajectory, do they? They go through spots.
And I've probably not met a parent who hasn't said a variation of, my child won't engage, be it 1 out of 4, 2 out of 4, for a period of time, for whatever. And that goes from little, like my daughter at 2 would balk at certain therapies. They were tough. And so so refusing,
I guess, I use that word too, but it's not necessarily a negative thing, isn't it? It's not negative for the child, it's not negative for the parent or for the therapist even. It's simply sending a clear message. Many cases. A clear message. All right, so let's move on to the next question. So we're in the lockdown questions. How many different support workers can come into my house during lockdown? The health orders on New South Wales website aren't clear for me. Well, first of all, they aren't clear for most of us, I think. I think we've all taken a double take, or we've gone somewhere else to verify whether we're making the right interpretation. Carolyn, how would you break this down for someone?
So on the New South Wales health website, a worker is not included as part of the people who can come into your place. So again, depending on where you are in New South Wales, you'll have different variations of lockdown. So people are still allowed to have, if you're in a rural area, you're still allowed to have up to 5 people to come and visit at any one time. If you're in one of those tighter lockdown places, I'm in the Hunter region, Newcastle Hunter region, where just entered the no visitors to your house sort of zone, which I know Sydney's been in for.
So the Greater Sydney, maybe speak to the tightest restrictions first, the Greater Sydney area, or the tightest ones in the, and then we'll just sort of step back to the regional.
So in those tighter areas, a support worker to help you do those essential tasks is classified as a worker. They're not classified as a visitor to your home, which means that if you need 2 people to do a transfer, you need 2 people to do a transfer, and that's that fits in that. And that's probably the one that I've had I guess, more people approach around, where there is that absolute need for that 2-on-1 support through that. Obviously, in terms of what the public health orders are, and what we understand the transmission methods of COVID are to minimise the number of people who are coming through your house. So making that call yourself as to what's essential and what's not essential. So support workers, NDIS funded, are typically deemed to be somewhat essential, but we do know that there are certain supports. So in those tighter lockdown areas, or the day programs have closed, but they've been encouraged to either set up an online version to be able to do that, or where necessary, one-to-one supports. And again, we see people making different decisions based on their own particular needs. So some people don't need, they for a short period of time can go without that support, that paid support, and other people that's just not an option at all. So it is about making that right choice for you. But you need those two. If you need 2 support staff to come in to do a transfer, to do whatever particular thing it is, you can still have that in place.
Yeah, and I think that's and let's move on to the next question, because it sort of follows on from this really nicely, I think, and talks about the risks and, you know, what's essential for individuals. Oh, it might be the one after this one, but anyway, okay, we'll jump to this one first. I might have ordered them a bit off there, but my LAC rang me today to schedule a review meeting soon. I said I wanted to wait until after lockdown, then she can meet my son face to face. She said it wouldn't matter, as she's not offering face to face. I drew the conclusion that it was a new LAC that hadn't worked with the family potentially, and so that's why maybe she said I wanted the LAC to meet my meet my son. Yeah, what do you think?
Look, what we have seen, partly through COVID, and partly through some of the information that the NDIS has been, I guess, sort of making publicly available, is that their planning processes behind the scenes are changing, which means that I've been a part of the scheme since 2013, so we were promised a planner for life kind of thing back then. Definitely not the case, and to be honest, wouldn't want to have stopped some of those early planners from the promotions that they've currently managed to attain, so they could remain my planner for life.
That's right.
So, it kind of goes both ways through that. But what we're seeing, and again, certainly through COVID, is that that as a plan, it goes to sort of the next available person. So they could be anywhere, either within the state, within that particular partner in the community offering, or that early childhood, early intervention offering. So where those partners are there, they may not be local to you, so they may not be able to do that sort of face-to-face. Having also done hundreds probably of plan review meetings, meeting face to face is not always necessarily essential. So I know that we talked about that being an important thing in the beginning, and we certainly do want that to be able to happen, but most of the partners in the community are able to offer Zoom, Microsoft Teams meetings, so you can actually do what we're doing here, and have that opportunity to e-meet, for want of a better name for it. But again, the information that the delegates and the planners and the LACs work on is the written stuff. So we've seen the newspaper articles, the gentleman, the amputee, who had to prove that he no longer had legs on paper and get the written report for it. I've had to support a family through a similar thing. So had a feeding tube forever, and typically lifted the t-shirt, would go, look, got one of these, but needed that documented evidence as to what that support is. So while it is obviously important to have that meeting to sort of understand those things, the planners and the delegates no longer have, I guess, that flexibility that they had in the early years around pulling together all that information for that full picture. It does come down to that evidence. That's So yeah.
I feel you always bring us back to that really, really important point, isn't it? Which is look at the evidence. Does it address what the scheme is looking for, has already outlined for us? It's sort of like all roads lead to Rome.
Pretty much.
Kind of back to that written evidence that's submitted. Yeah. Okay. All right, moving on. This was the one I was talking about in relation to closures. So my son can't attend the day program during New South Wales lockdown. He is suffering with his mental health now. Can I use his plan to find a psychologist for telehealth appointments? He doesn't have psychology included in the plan. It's occupational therapy. And she just said, she had actually put a call into her LAC, but she was awaiting an answer. So she decided to jump on and ask your thoughts, Carolyn.
Look, and this is a really important question. You may not like the answer I'm about to say, but it's a really important question. So we know that, day programs are shut down. The providers are being encouraged to either set up some online things or where essential one-to-one. That information is, I'm going to say it's the NDIS Commission website, but we can check that.
All right.
Information.
Perhaps I could share that in the resources for everyone, because I'm going to send out a replay, a replay version by email, so we can perhaps follow that up, and I'll just make a note of that now.
To be able to do that. So there are some specific guidelines around alternatives that day programs are able to implement and are encouraged to be able to do, particularly in situations like this where that change of routine is having a negative impact.
Okay.
There are a couple of easy read, easy understand resources available through, and again, I'll give you the information for those ones around, I guess, what lockdown is and sort of how that works as well, just to help with that understanding that it is a point in time, a temporary, which again, if time's not an easily understood concept, is only of limited help through that. But in terms of using the psychology funding where it's been put in as an OT, typically I would say like a solid no to that. So the OT put in there for a purpose, you actually want to be able to do that by the end of it. And again, the federal government has a lot of information and resources and funding that they've put towards mental health through COVID, actually using some of those mainstream supports.
Is that Medicare? I wonder if it doubled, remember, from 10 sessions to 20 sessions under just a general mental health care plan. Are those the types of provisions that you're talking about that are there specifically for COVID?
So there's that one. There's additional funding being put through to your lifelines, your kids' helplines. And those types of resources. They've opened, so that Medicare funding is now opened up to includes OTs as part of that. So where people need so different supports to be able to navigate through. So a mental health OT can sometimes be useful if it's a structure that's required due to a change of thing. But again, that mainstream do that through there. And so that's probably the best place to start. If you then find that you can't navigate those, you can't access those. And I know several people with disability who have utilised your lifelines, your kids' helplines and those types of things. Once you've got through that initial navigation point, they've been good. So doing a blanket, they're no good with people just isn't fair. There may be complexities, there may be some that is challenging that they can't do. Not saying that they can cater for everybody, but they certainly do their best to be able to give that extra time that's required or whatever that is to be able to do that. So,
and do you mind if I just play choice and control advocate here? What about if a family says, you know what, Carolyn, that all sounds wonderful, but I know what's really the real risks here in my family right now in our situation, and I haven't got time to go and figure that out. I'm just going to use NDIS. And they get to the planning meeting. For review, natural review, whatever that is and whatever situation it is, and however much of that breakdown they've spent on psychology addressing the situation here versus the OT. What are some of the risks to the family? what are some of the reasons that you say that's not?
Yep. Look, one of the bigger ones is that where they've funded a particular allied health professional and you haven't realised that, you've demonstrated that what the agency has deemed as reasonable and necessary, you don't value and you don't need, and so the chances of getting that funding, particularly if you're using ongoing funding, is not essential. So you may see a cut in that in the future.
Yeah.
They'll wrap you over the knuckles. They'll tell you that you shouldn't have done that. They'll psychology is not part of NDIS. You'll get all of those things told to you. We have seen instances where a delegate has said that a particular funding has been used what they deemed inappropriately, and the ability to self-manage has been removed from people because of that.
Yeah.
So there's potential things. You can always, if you have purchased something, you believe it meets all of the criteria, and a delegate tells you that it hasn't, and they either and ultimately they tell you that it needs to be repaid, because they can tell you that that's not the case, and there's a couple of things they can do. So remove self-management, not fund something. They go through a normal review process. If they tell you that something needs to be repaid as part of that, that is a reviewable decision. So you can still take that through.
Good to know. Yeah, I don't like seeing that on Facebook, that phrase, you'll be made to repay it, just thrown around with no context. I think it's just it invokes such fear and such more confusion, really, to uncertainty.
And it is something, so it is something that they can do, but you can review that decision, which includes through to the tribunal. If it gets upheld, you can actually also ask for that fee to be waived, essentially. So again, that's another sort of process through. So if you back yourself to the point that you're prepared to go through those,
then go ahead. Yeah. No, I think it's really important. I think it's really important to talk about these things in scenario and then sort of step it out and then go, well, down the track, what may not, but we may find ourselves in that situation. So reduced funding, requested to pay it back, and or restrictions on how flexible your funding is in the future are the likely scenarios. Possibly, and this is one that I wouldn't fall under fraud. There becomes that line, obviously. Quite different. Absolutely.
I don't think they are likely to land that one there. So
okay. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so let's move on. All right, we get to the interesting stuff. I mean, that's a really essential, and all the other stuff's on our mind, but NDIS big picture, what's happening? So we've got a few little bits, and then we'll invite you to share any other additional points, Carolyn, that are on your mind right now that you'd like to share with our community. So so this one is actually a funding question, but I think it feeds into a more of a big picture. That's why I put it in this category. In my new plan, on the goals section, there's a few times it's written, the LAC will help me connect to mainstream services. What does that mean? So I think that my guess is this is going back to some of this real intention of the scheme around the different tiers. Am I correct in that, Carolyn?
Okay. I would say that's the case. So the LAC, your local area coordinator, the intention is that they will assist with the plan reviews, so have that planning meeting, and then the other part of their role is to help you to connect to the services that are around. So mainstream services are services that are open to anybody, everybody. So schools, health, justice, all of those sorts of things, and
community programs like local community programs.
We often see, so community is another. So where we see this written, it'll often be connect to either mainstream services, which are those other government departmenty type things.
Right.
Community stuff, which is your local community centre, your yoga classes, whatever else that's out there that again everybody can do, or disability specific providers will be the things that we see written through that, and they are somewhat used interchangeably. So what this often means is that 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 local area coordinator will help you to implement your plan, to get it started as part of how you go. I've got to say, in 8 years, I've not seen that happen successfully very many times, which is, and that's partly, I guess, how the scheme was to now. So while we were trying to get everybody in, so across from the state-based things into the NDIS, there really wasn't a lot of capacity for that. But everyone's been rolled across to the NDIS about a year now. So we should be seeing more of this where the LACs can start to implement plans. And I can't see that in the areas that we have a lot of presence, that's necessarily been the case. You can go back to the LAC. So they're the people who did your planning meeting. Literally ask them. It says here that you're going to help me to do this and I don't know how to do it. Can you assist me to do that? The other side that we see is a lot of people have this written, they get to the end of their plan, they still have funding left over. Don't be afraid to go, the LAC was supposed to do this and it didn't, and that's part of the reason why I haven't used all my funding. I actually haven't been able to connect with all of the services and the supports that I do. So
yeah, which brings that phrase to life, doesn't it? Rather than just letting it sit in a plan and be dormant and not, meaningless, but actually sort of poke it and prod it a bit and see what happens. And
it doesn't avoid, so the question that we had earlier where they've put the call into the LAC and hadn't heard back, again, something that we also hear quite a lot. Again, just documenting, rang them on this date, sent an email, nothing happened. That again forms part of your evidence for I haven't used all of my funding because they were supposed to do this and it happened. So,
and I remember doing that with the times, showing the evidence, the times that I reach out to the state-based caring organisations and what support and services and advice I received and how I utilised that. And then we reached the end of that mainstream service. So that was, well, first of all, I was able to receive some mainstream support, which was excellent. And then also show the evidence about where it sort of sits within the NDIS responsibility to fund from that point forward. All right. We knew we were getting to the portal or the app or something, weren't we? So the question is the NDIS going to change self-management by making everyone use the NDIS app? And we have to show everything about each support in the app. So I don't have personal experience with actually using but just to clarify for the community, I double checked. It still is in beta phase, testing phase, I believe, the NDIS app. So Carolyn, what do you think they're really asking here?
So
it's a loaded question, isn't it?
Look, I also haven't used the app. Know people who have a bit of an insight into what it is. So this question does make some sense to me.
Oh, good.
As the first person to self-manage an NDIS plan and someone and author the initial training on self-management, so 7-8 years ago, so 2013, 2014, started doing this has always been flagged as something that was going to be likely to happen. So the Australian National Audit Office has long expressed concerns around self-managers and the way that funds are utilised, because they are public funds and typically we expect there to be a degree of probity around how public funds are spent, and that's not been something that self-managers have been able to do. And there's at least one report, I believe there's probably a couple of reports through the National Audit Office that specifically deal with this type of thing. So the fact that the agency is looking for, I guess, some more transparency into what those purchases are is not unexpected.
All right.
And if I put my my taxpayer, I want to know what's happening hat on, I go, this is a really, really great thing. If I put I'm the one who's doing the claiming, I go, oh really, I've got something else to do now.
Yeah, I don't know my physiotherapist's ABN number off by heart. And it's going to test me if I have to enter it every single time. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's things like that I just go, oh really? But as a big picture, I get that. For me personally, we have purchased stuff, so supports. My daughter has a significant physical disability, so we've bought some things from overseas that are just not available within Australia to assist her to access different things. We've also bought some secondhand equipment through Gumtree and places like that that meet her needs that fall under those appropriate categories. Just clarify that I haven't done anything wrong here, but that meet everything that they should within that self-manager checklist, but have not been purchased from places that have a solid ABN. I would like to hope that there is still that flexibility to do that, because one, we have supports that just aren't available in our country, and we also have supports that we've bought a lot cheaper by being able to get secondhand than we ever would have been able to go through that more sort of formal process to get things. I'd like to hope that that was still an option in there, but if it wasn't, look, we are 8 years in. On one hand, I can count the number of transactions that are likely to have been impacted by not being able to put in an ABN. So it's in the big scheme of things.
All right.
I'm essentially okay.
Yeah. So to summarize it, would you say that the development of the NDIS app is not in itself threatening to self-management at the core at this stage? We don't have any evidence of that.
Yeah, no. If you're doing all the things that you should be doing, there'll be some complexities where, again, people are directly employing staff that need to filter through. But I'm assuming that that's being trialled and that's being filtered back, and that will be captured within that. So if you're doing all the stuff through that self-management checklist, can I purchase? You'll be fine. Yeah,
it's still the same. Yeah, great. All right, so I saved one of the doozies for last, because have we not spent an enormous amount of oxygen talking about NDIS assessments over the last I don't know how long, actually, how many months, but here we are. So this question relates directly to that, but then I'll leave it for you, Carolyn, to sort of wrap up and give your final thoughts about this NDIS big picture. So the question is, now that independent assessors won't be doing my NDIS reports, will I continue to use the physio and other therapists to do all my reports?
So I love this question. I am firmly camp we will see some form of independent assessment down the track, whether that's now or in the future. The agency has flagged it multiple times. Even the language that's being utilised about independent assessments not continuing in their current format, the recent DSS information around the changes to the legislation coming through, that page still links to information around independent assessments. So I'm of this may be on hold for a period. There will be a consultation, there'll be some sort of creation work done, whatever all of this looks like.
More consultation.
But somewhere down the track, we will come to a version of this being the case. And to be honest, with a lot of the families that we work with, and a lot of families who really are just getting left behind in the system, it's not a bad thing. So there's some families where this is particularly problematic, but there are a lot where this can actually help them to do that. So the agency's always had that capacity to request an independent assessment to come through, and I've supported numerous families over the years to do that, and in each instance that we've done that, it's resulted in higher levels of funding because the support need was properly documented and was explained. So they were those scenarios where life didn't reflect funding and the agency wasn't clear, so the planner has implemented something to get one of these happening to do that. So a little bit different to that bulk sort of process, but we've done some work trialling some of the tools that they've used, and they come up reasonably okay. They don't always show everything that's required, but they come up reasonably okay. So certainly continue using your physio, your other therapists to do your reports. Get them to do the assessment. So point in time, what your function is around things. So, and particularly where you need those support needs is probably the best information for that. So, I see a lot of reports that are really lovely. Little Johnny is a great little kid with a beautiful smile, and we've done 11 sessions and we've played with Play-Doh throughout them. Great report, but it doesn't actually tell me what's happening. Little Johnny has difficulty doing his buttons up. That's a lot more useful in terms of that sort of stuff. So where those goals are, and often we have our NDIS goals, and then we have our therapy goals, and our therapy goals are typically a bit more specific, actually working towards those specific ones. So yeah, we've worked on doing up buttons, and you know what, we're there for 4 out of 5 of them now. Yay team sort of things.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that, Carolyn. Look, we've had a question come in live, and I'm just going to throw it to you because I know this is an area of one of your strengths. So we are almost getting just to the hour. So if we have some of our audience that needs to jump off now, then we'd like to, first of all, before I ask the question, thank everyone so much for coming along today to the community Q&A. As I said, I will make sure that we have a recorded version emailed out so that you have reference points and you can rewatch any sections that are very relevant to you. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us directly or reply to that email, and that will come straight back to me as well. So moving on to this question, it says, would it be possible to get a support coordinator to help specifically with housing? I have been approved for funding to get specialist disability accommodation, but so far the places have been in areas that would displace me from my local area where I have lived for many years now. Do you have any advice on getting SDA specifically in my local area?
Okay, that one's
look, it is, and I know we're running on time. I wanted to sort of give you the headlines, but also say that we have the opportunity to respond to you privately in email as well, and we will do that to make sure that we share any, I guess, contacts or resources that we have.
Yeah. Look, usually where people have just recently gotten SDA funded in their plans, but they don't have a dwelling to move into, they're typically support coordination funded to help with that transition point, because it is a lot of negotiating, talking to people, doing things. So if that has been left out, I'd certainly be looking to go back and asking for that to be included, because it is quite a specialist skill set to be able to do that.
Okay.
In terms of finding someone in your local area and someone who is building a property to the specs that you have been approved for. So I'm assuming, so you've got the SDA approval, it will have number of residents, category of property. Talking to other support coordinators, other people around, they will start to know who the developers are in your region. There are a few bigger places and a couple of websites that claim to bring all of that information together, but don't necessarily have what we would call the pipeline, so the stuff that's being built and that's being decided along the way. But if you basically be known in the area that that's what you're looking to do, it can help you find another tenant. So most SDA approvals that we're seeing are for multiple residents. So you can actually start, I guess, choosing who you're going to live with as part of that. And then they will find you. It kind of almost feels like whatever that movie is, that build it and they will come type of scenario. But if you've got access to a support coordinator who then has access to other support coordinators through their network,
because then you get their networks, don't you? And that's the part, the specialist part, that kind of can be really valuable.
And that can do that. So some of those websites, and we can do the links through to those. Can certainly assist to help you find some people in those regions, but obviously you've then got that delay. So if you were to find, I guess, a potential flatmate now, and then a developer and that ability to build something, you're still probably looking at a good 12 months minimum before you would have something to be able to move into. So again, depending on your circumstances and I guess that risk of homelessness and other things that may come with that, you may or may not have that luxury of time.
Okay.
But yeah, certainly if there's no support coordination funding in there, going back and requesting it. Because if you've just had SDA approved and there's nothing, to do that thinking, that's a bit of a mistake from that planner perspective.
So does that mean that if you find a support coordinator that works in this housing area and it's got good networks, they don't necessarily need to be in your area where you're looking to stay, do they? They don't necessarily need to be in your community. It really just depends on their networks.
Yeah.
And if they have the right networks, then they'll be able to find the information at the right path of development.
To do that
for the property. So
I've got a couple of developers that I do a little bit of stuff with, and they work around the country. Like that. So it's very much here's these two people, they're both approved for the same property. They want to live together. We now need one of these built. They go do their magic and go affordable. Yes, we're going to do that here, or they go, actually, we can't make that work in your region for whatever reason. Find me another two of those and make them work to do that. So
great. All right. So we'll do some follow-up and make sure we put those extra links in regards to that question as well. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been so great to have you here. And thank you so much, Carolyn, too, for your time and your expert. I think we've drained enough out of your brain for one day. Was there any closing comments or anything that you wanted to wrap up with that maybe I've left out of today's discussion, Carolyn?
No, look, I think we're pretty good. That the NDIS is changing. Everything is point in time and everything is specific circumstances. So just because you read something on a Facebook page saying I did this and got X, or there's often more behind the scenes to that. And it does come down to that evidence that you have being a large part of how to affect, the system.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you'll be receiving a replay in your inbox very shortly, and that will have captions on it as well. If you have any specific things that you'd like to follow up with us directly, then our links will be on the screen now, or they will be linked in the email. Justine, a big shout out to you in South Australia. Thank you so much for manning our chat box today. It's so great to have team members that are just so like-minded and just love these community forums where we can share knowledge and talk about the things that are on people's minds. So we look forward to seeing everyone next time. I'll just read out, Carolyn. People have said thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.